On the night of January 31st, 1953, a combination of natural forces converged over northwestern Europe with devastating consequences. Powerful winds drove seawater toward the coast. A high spring tide raised already elevated sea levels, and aging flood defenses faced pressures far beyond what many communities had ever experienced. Across the low-lying shores of the North Sea, water began to rise through the darkness. In towns, villages, and isolated farms, many people were asleep when the sea crossed embankments and breached dikes. By morning, entire neighborhoods had disappeared beneath floodwaters. Thousands of lives had been lost, and one of the most destructive natural disasters in modern European history had unfolded in a matter of hours. The catastrophe that became known as the North Sea Flood did not occur without historical precedent. For centuries, communities along the North Sea coast had lived with the constant challenge of keeping the sea at bay. Large areas of the Netherlands, eastern England, and parts of Belgium lay at or below sea level. Generations had built dikes, seawalls, drainage systems, and other defenses to reclaim land and protect settlements from flooding. These engineering efforts allowed agriculture, trade, and urban development to flourish. But they also created a continuing dependence on the strength and reliability of flood control infrastructure. By the mid-20th century, many coastal defenses reflected conditions and assumptions formed before the Second World War. Wartime damage, limited resources, and competing reconstruction priorities had delayed improvements in some regions. Although experts understood the risks posed by severe storms, the possibility of an exceptionally powerful surge striking under precisely the wrong conditions remained difficult to predict. Weather forecasting and emergency communication systems were far less advanced than they would become in later decades. In the final days of January 1953, meteorological conditions began to develop across the North Atlantic. A deep area of low pressure moved eastward, generating strong northwesterly winds over the North Sea. As the storm intensified, those winds pushed enormous volumes of water southward into the narrowing basin of the sea. The shape of the coastline and seabed amplified the effect. Water that might otherwise have dispersed across a broader area became concentrated toward coastal regions of the Netherlands, Belgium, and eastern England. At the same time, astronomical conditions contributed to unusually high tides. The combination of storm-driven water and naturally elevated tidal levels produced a storm surge of exceptional magnitude. As evening turned into night on January 31st, water levels rose steadily. In many places, coastal authorities received indications that conditions were becoming dangerous. Yet communication systems were limited, and warnings did not always reach vulnerable communities in time. The timing of the disaster greatly increased its impact. Much of the flooding occurred during the night, when visibility was poor and most residents were asleep, as seawater overtopped defenses and began to erode embankments. Breaches formed in multiple locations. Once gaps appeared in dikes and seawalls, enormous volumes of water rushed inland. The Netherlands suffered the most severe losses. Large portions of the southwestern provinces, particularly Zeeland, South Holland, and North Brabant, faced catastrophic flooding. Many of these areas consisted of islands, polders, and reclaimed land protected by extensive but vulnerable dike systems. When sections of those defenses failed, seawater spread rapidly across fields, roads, and settlements. Entire communities found themselves isolated within hours. Houses collapsed under the force of the water or became surrounded by deep floods. Families climbed to the upper floors, rooftops, and attics seeking refuge. In some cases, people remained trapped for many hours before rescue became possible. Transportation networks were disrupted, making it difficult for emergency services to reach affected areas. Telephone lines failed, roads disappeared beneath water, and information about conditions in flooded districts remained incomplete. The scale of the disaster became clearer only gradually. More than 1,800 people lost their lives in the Netherlands alone. Tens of thousands were forced to leave their homes. Livestock losses were enormous, and large areas of farmland were contaminated by saltwater. For a country that had long relied on careful water management, the flood represented both a human tragedy and a profound challenge to national confidence in existing defenses. Belgium also experienced severe flooding, particularly in coastal regions. Storm surges inundated low-lying areas and damaged infrastructure. Dozens of people lost their lives, while many others were displaced. Although the scale of destruction was smaller than that experienced in the Netherlands, the flood demonstrated that the threat extended across national boundaries. The same natural forces affected multiple countries simultaneously, revealing the shared vulnerability of communities around the North Sea. Across the sea in the United Kingdom, Eastern England endured one of its worst flood disasters of the 20th century. Coastal areas of Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, and Lincolnshire were particularly affected. Strong winds and rising water overwhelmed sea defenses in numerous locations. In some communities, residents received little warning before floodwaters arrived. The town of Canvey Island in Essex became one of the most heavily affected locations. Situated on low-lying land near the Thames estuary, the community experienced devastating flooding. Many homes were inundated, and significant loss of life occurred. Elsewhere along the east coast, entire neighborhoods were submerged. Hundreds of people died in England, and thousands more were displaced. The impact extended beyond residential areas. Ports, transportation links, industrial facilities, and agricultural lands suffered extensive damage. Fishing fleets and maritime infrastructure faced heavy losses. Economic disruption continued long after floodwaters receded. The disaster illustrated how modern societies remained vulnerable to extreme environmental events despite advances in engineering and technology. Rescue operations began almost immediately but faced extraordinary difficulties. Military forces, emergency services, local authorities, and volunteers all participated in relief efforts. Boats, helicopters, and amphibious vehicles were used to reach stranded residents. In many flooded areas, rescuers navigated dangerous conditions, including strong currents, floating debris, and damaged structures. The response highlighted both remarkable acts of cooperation and significant limitations in emergency preparedness. Communication challenges slowed coordination. In some locations, authorities struggled to obtain accurate information about conditions on the ground. Nevertheless, thousands of people were evacuated, and emergency shelters were established for those who had lost their homes. International assistance also played an important role. Neighboring countries offered support, equipment, and personnel. The disaster attracted widespread attention across Europe and beyond. Images of flooded towns and displaced populations underscored the scale of the emergency and generated strong public sympathy. Waters gradually receded. The full extent of the destruction emerged. Homes, schools, businesses, roads, bridges, and agricultural lands had suffered extensive damage. Saltwater contamination posed a particularly serious problem in affected farming regions. Crops were destroyed, and restoring agricultural productivity required significant effort and time. The human consequences extended far beyond the immediate death toll. Survivors faced displacement, financial hardship, and the emotional burden of losing family members, neighbors, and homes. Many communities experienced lasting demographic and social changes. Some settlements required years to recover, while others underwent substantial redevelopment. In the Netherlands, the disaster prompted one of the most ambitious civil engineering programs ever undertaken. Policymakers concluded that existing flood defenses required fundamental improvement. The result was the Delta Works, a vast system of dams, storm surge barriers, sluices, and reinforced dikes designed to reduce the risk of future flooding. Planning began soon after the disaster. Engineers analyzed the causes of the flood and evaluated numerous proposals for strengthening coastal protection. The objective was not simply to repair damaged infrastructure, but to redesign entire sections of the country's water management system. Construction would continue for decades, eventually becoming internationally recognized as one of the world's most significant hydraulic engineering achievements. The Delta works reflected a broader shift in thinking about flood risk. Rather than relying solely on local defenses, planners pursued an integrated approach that considered entire coastal systems. The project reduced the length of coastline requiring direct protection and introduced new methods for controlling water movement. It became a symbol of the Netherlands' determination to adapt to the realities of living below sea level. The United Kingdom also implemented important changes following the disaster. Investigations examined the causes of the flooding and identified weaknesses in warning systems and coastal defenses. Improvements were made to forecasting capabilities, emergency planning, and flood protection infrastructure. One long-term consequence was increased attention to storm surge risks affecting the Thames estuary, ultimately contributing to future flood management initiatives. Scientific understanding of storm surges advanced significantly in the years after 1953. Researchers studied atmospheric conditions, tidal dynamics, and coastal geography to improve forecasting models. Technological developments enhanced the ability of meteorological agencies to monitor storms and issue warnings. Communication systems became faster and more reliable, increasing the likelihood that populations could receive timely alerts before dangerous events occurred. The flood also influenced international cooperation in disaster management and coastal engineering. Countries facing similar risks exchanged knowledge and technical expertise. Lessons learned from the North Sea flood informed planning decisions far beyond Europe, shaping approaches to flood protection in other vulnerable regions around the world. Decades later, the disaster continues to occupy an important place in historical memory. Memorials, museums, and educational programs preserve the experiences of those who lived through the event. Survivor accounts provide valuable insight into the realities of the flood and the challenges faced by affected communities. These personal stories complement the broader historical record, reminding later generations that the disaster was measured not only in statistics but also in individual lives. The North Sea flood of 1953 occurred at the intersection of geography, weather, infrastructure, and human settlement. Powerful storm surge struck some of Europe's most vulnerable coastal landscapes, exposing weaknesses in existing defenses and overwhelming communities during a single winter night. The result was a tragedy that claimed more than 2,000 lives across several countries and transformed the way governments approached flood protection. Its significance extends beyond the disaster itself. The flood became a turning point in coastal engineering, emergency planning, and scientific research. It demonstrated the consequences of underestimating environmental risk and highlighted the importance of preparation, communication, and resilient infrastructure. More than 70 years later, the events of January 1953 remain a reminder that even in technologically advanced societies, the relationship between land and sea requires constant attention, adaptation, and respect.